Hello everyone, let me introduce myself first. My name is Stephen Rafael. My name is 33220049 and I'm from class 6B07 and I'm a Bina Sarana Informatika University student. And in this video, I'm gonna discuss about the project 1 from interpreting. In this video, I'm gonna interpret the two videos that given from the project 1 and let's get started.
How many of you can speak more than one language? Now keep your hands up if you can speak more than two. And how about three? All right, very impressive. But did you know that you actually could have easily learned 25 languages? It's true. This is a natural human phenomenon that any normal child born anywhere in the world is capable of learning any language that he or she is exposed to. And did you know that the languages that your child is exposed to before the age of 7, which is also known as the critical age period, are the only languages that he or she will be exposed to later in life? Leonard Bloomfield said, "The acquisition of a language is doubtless the greatest intellectual feat that any one of us is ever required to perform." So I asked myself and some others in the overseas student program here, why do we learn languages? At first, we all learn language because we have to. As humans, we're designed to learn language just like we're designed to walk. There's simply no preventing it. But then there's some of us who actually do it for fun. We go through the struggle, we put in the effort, feeling wrong all the time. But we love it because the rewards are so great. It's awesome to speak another language, to carry it with you everywhere you go, to travel and communicate with people in their native language makes conversation so much more personal, and you actually get to enjoy more out of life because it gives you the opportunity to understand more music and movies and games from around the world. So I want to ask you another question, and I want you all to think about this. If we started taking advantage of the amazing ability that children have to learn languages and the plethora of free language learning tools we have on our devices today, could we, by reducing language barriers, reduce other barriers in society? Which begs me to ask another question. What exactly are language barriers, and what do they do?
Berapa banyak dari kalian yang bisa berbicara lebih dari satu bahasa? Sekarang angkat tangan. Jika kalian bisa berbicara lebih dari 2, bagaimana dengan 3? Sungguh mengesankan. Tapi tahukah kalian bahwa sebenarnya kalian bisa udah belajar 25 bahasa? Ini benar. Ini adalah fenomena alami manusia yang dimana setiap anak normal yang lahir di dunia mampu mempelajari bahasa apapun yang dikenalkan padanya. Dan tahukah kalian bahwa pada bahasa yang dikenalkan pada anak sebelum menginjak usia 7 tahun yang dikenal sebagai masa kritis adalah satu-satunya bahasa yang akan benar-benar terpatri saat dia dewasa. Leonard Bloomfield pernah mengatakan, penguasaan bahasa adalah pencapaian intelektual terbesar yang pernah dilakukan oleh umat manusia. Jadi, saya bertanya kepada diri saya sendiri dan juga kepada teman-teman mahasiswa asing di sini, mengapa kita belajar bahasa? Awalnya kita semua belajar bahasa karena kita harus. Sebagai manusia, kita memang dirancang untuk belajar bahasa. Seperti kita dirancang untuk berjalan, tidak bisa dihindari. Namun, ada juga dari kita yang mempelajari karena senang. Kita rela bersusah payah, merasakan kesalahan terus-menerus, namun kita menikmati prosesnya dan karena hasilnya yang sungguh luar biasa. Rasanya hebat bisa berbicara bahasa lain, membawanya kemanapun kita pergi, melakukan perjalanan, dan berbicara dengan orang dalam bahasa mereka sendiri, membuat percakapan jadi lebih personal. Dan kita pun jadi jauh lebih bisa menikmati hidup karena kita bisa memahami lebih banyak musik, film, dan permainan dari berbagai belahan dunia. Sekarang saya ingin bertanya lagi. Jika kita mulai memanfaatkan kemampuan luar biasa anak-anak untuk belajar bahasa dan banyaknya alat pembelajaran yang tersedia secara gratis di perangkat kita, bisakah kita mengurangi hambatan bahasa dan juga mengurangi hambatan-hambatan yang lain dalam masyarakat? Ini membawa saya pada pertanyaan berikutnya. Apa sebenarnya hambatan bahasa dan apa pengaruhnya?
I know what some of you are thinking. You're at the dinner table, and you're between your mother, who's Russian, and your beautiful American girlfriend. And you're having a moment of realization that you've just hired yourself out as a translator. So you have to spend the whole evening hearing everything 3 times. And even though you thought that you could speak English and Russian perfectly, you're starting to feel confused and frustrated, and you're desperate for a couple minutes of alone time just to think in whatever language you choose to think in. But there's a lot more to language barriers that I want you to know. Have you ever heard of linguistic relativity? Linguistic relativity is the field which asks questions on the relations between language, perception, and thought. The core theory is called the deterministic theory. It's scientifically proven, and it states that the language you speak shapes the way you think and influences your behavior. The fathers of linguistic relativity, Benjamin Whorf and Edward Sapir, also state that if a word doesn't exist in your language, you won't know the concept. Now, I think that those guys can be a little extreme in their theories. I think, rather, that if a word doesn't exist in your language, you're a lot less likely to identify with that concept. One of my friends here in Israel, a native German speaker, told me a story once of how the English language changed the way that she thought about love. She told me she still remembers the first time she heard the term falling in love, and that she was shocked at the use of the language because she had never thought of being in love as something that happened suddenly and dramatically. And she pictured someone actually falling. And she could feel that, and then she knew that someday she would experience falling in love and not just being in love.
Saya tahu sebagian dari kalian mungkin berpikir, kalian sedang duduk di meja makan, dan antara ibu kalian yang orang Rusia dan pacar kalian yang cantik dari Amerika. Dan tiba-tiba kalian sadar kalau kalian jadi penerjemah dadakan. Kalian harus siap mendengar segalanya 3 kali. Dan meskipun kalian merasa bisa berbahasa Inggris dan Rusia dengan lancar, kalian mulai merasa bingung dan frustasi. Dan saat ingin punya waktu sejenak untuk berpikir dalam bahasa pilihan kalian. Tapi sebenarnya, hambatan bahasa lebih dari sekedar itu. Pernah dengar istilah relativitas linguistik? Ini adalah bidang kajian yang mengeksplorasi hubungan antara bahasa, persepsi, dan pemikiran. Teori utamanya disebut teori deterministik, dan ini telah terbukti secara ilmiah. Teori ini menyatakan bahwa bahasa yang kita gunakan membentuk cara kita dan cara kita berpikir dan mempengaruhi perilaku-perilaku kita sehari-hari. Tokoh-tokoh relativitas linguistik, Benjamin Whorf dan Edward Sapir, mengatakan bahwa jika suatu kata tidak ada dalam bahasa kalian, maka kalian tidak akan memahami konsepnya. Saya pribadi merasa pendapat mereka agak ekstrim. Menurut saya, jika suatu kata tidak ada dalam bahasa kalian akan lebih sulit merasa terhubung dengan konsep itu sendiri. Salah satu teman saya di Israel, penutur bahasa Jerman, pernah bercerita bagaimana bahasa Inggris mengubah cara ia memandang cinta. Ia masih teringat pertama kali mendengar istilah falling in love atau jatuh cinta, dan ia terkejut karena dalam bahasa Jerman, cinta tidak digambarkan sebagai sesuatu yang mendadak. Ia membayangkan orang yang benar-benar jatuh dan bisa merasakannya, dan sejak itu dia sadar bahwa suatu hari ia akan mengalami jatuh cinta dan bukan hanya mencintai.
Also, in body language, we find interesting differences among languages. In Hebrew, this means wait. However, this is a great insult in Italy, and I wanted you all to know that. And the most obvious differences in languages that are influencing our thoughts and behaviors is in vocabulary. One scientific experiment in linguistic relativity showed how gender association impacts people's perception. This study used the word key, which is in German a masculine word, and in Spanish it's feminine. So subjects were asked to come up with words to describe a key. And the German speakers used words such as heavy, durable, strong, useful, metal. But the Spanish speakers chose words such as golden, lovely, little, delicate, and shiny to describe the same word, key. Another interesting difference we find among languages is in the perception of correctness. I read in a study by John Myhill at University of Haifa that correctness in present-day English and most European languages is based on prestige. So the development of these languages has actually followed the trends of its most elite speakers. But other languages perceive correctness in a much different way. Languages such as Arabic and Hebrew and Icelandic are based on textual references. So, if a word appears in a text, in Arabic, which is based on the Quran, and Hebrew is based on the Torah and Mishnah, if a word or grammar appears in these texts, it's correct, and if it doesn't, it's not correct. For these languages, there's no connection between correction and prestige. And there are many, many words in languages that don't appear anywhere else, such as stam in Hebrew, which can be translated into English as just kidding, but not really. It's a unique word to let someone know that you're not being serious. And halomot paz is how you say sweet dreams in Hebrew, but it actually translates directly as golden dreams. And there's a word in German that I love called Fernweh, which dictionaries translate it as itchy feet. And it's the opposite of homesick.
Dalam bahasa tubuh pun, kita menemukan perbedaan menarik antara bahasa. Dalam bahasa Ibrani, gerakan ini berarti menunggu, tapi di Italia ini adalah penghinaan besar. Dan perbedaan paling jelas antara bahasa yang mempengaruhi pikiran dan perilaku kita adalah pada kosakata. Satu eksperimen ilmiah menjelaskan tentang relativitas linguistik, menunjukkan bagaimana asosiasi gender mempengaruhi persepsi orang. Kata kunci dalam bahasa Jerman adalah maskulin, sementara dalam bahasa Spanyol adalah feminim. Ketika diminta mendeskripsikan kata kunci, penutur bahasa Jerman memilih kata seperti berat, kuat, logam, berguna. Sedangkan penutur bahasa Spanyol menggunakan kata seperti cantik, kecil, lembut, dan berkilau. Perbedaan menarik lainnya antara bahasa adalah dalam hal persepsi tentang kebenaran bahasa. Dalam studi oleh John Mill dari Universitas Haifa, dikatakan bahwa kebenaran berbahasa dalam bahasa Inggris dan sebagian besar bahasa Eropa berdasarkan pada prestis, artinya bahasa berkembang mengikuti tren para penuturnya yang paling elit. Namun dalam bahasa Arab, Ibrani, dan Islandia, kebenaran ditentukan dari teks. Misalnya dalam bahasa Arab, berdasarkan Al-Quran, dan dalam bahasa Ibrani, berdasarkan Mishneh Torah. Jika kata atau tata bahasa muncul dalam teks tersebut, maka itu benar. Jika tidak, maka itu salah. Tidak ada kaitan dengan status sosial. Ada banyak kata yang tidak bisa diterjemahkan. Contohnya stem dalam bahasa Ibrani, yang seperti cuma bercanda. Tapi sebenarnya lebih kompleks daripada itu sendiri. Atau kalamat pas, yang berarti mimpi indah. tapi harfiahnya berarti mimpi emas. Dalam bahasa Jerman ada kata Fernweh yang menggambarkan kerinduan untuk bepergian, kebalikan dari homesick.
It describes the feeling that you need to travel. So when my German friend taught me this word, I thought, wow, how I wish that this word existed in my language. And I wondered that if we use such a word, how my experience of feeling like the only one in my family with a strong desire to see the world may have been different. So a few weeks ago, after auditioning to be up here on the TED stage, I reached out to my psychology professor back in New York and asked him what he thought about linguistic relativity. And what he says explains the story of my friend and, in terms of psychology and memory, what happened when she learned a new term about love. He said, "It is the breadth of our language, not our vast experiences, which help color our lives. That is in memory. The language labels that we assign events and experiences shape, indeed, limit the way that we can remember them. For example, if the only positive emotion word we knew was happy, all positive memories are labeled as happy memories. And if they all fit in that happy bucket together, then their shared features, which make them labeled as happy, will be reinforced and at times amplified at the expense of their differences to allow for better access. This is because your mind categorizes everything with language labels so that it can reach for your memories as quickly as possible. And everything that you say and do, every decision you make, every conversation that you have is just a consequence of some memories, right? So in other words, your ability overall to access your memories is actually directly related to your breadth and knowledge of vocabulary. Because our languages are constantly changing, language barriers are just growing bigger and bigger. So what do you think, everyone? If we started taking advantage of children's amazing ability to learn languages and the plethora of free tools that we have to learn languages today, could we, by reducing language barriers, reduce other barriers in
Ketika teman
society?
saya dari Jerman mengajari saya kata itu, saya berpikir, wah, andai kata-kata ini ada dalam bahasa saya. Dan saya bertanya-tanya, jika saya tahu kata itu sejak kecil, mungkin saya tidak merasa aneh. Menjadi satu-satu di keluarga yang ingin sekali melihat dunia. Beberapa minggu lalu, setelah saya mengikuti audisi untuk berdiri di atas panggung TEDx ini, saya menghubungi profesor psikolog saya di New York dan bertanya pendapatnya tentang relativitas linguistik. Jawaban menjelaskan pengalaman teman saya dan bagaimana dalam psikologi dan ingatan, sesuatu berubah ketika ia belajar istilah baru tentang cinta. Katanya, bukan luasnya pengalaman kita, melainkan luasnya bahasa kita yang mewarnai hidup kita sendiri. Label bahasa yang kita berikan kepada pengalaman dan peristiwa membentuk dan membatasi cara kita mengingatnya. Misalnya, jika satu-satu kata positif yang kita tahu adalah bahagia, dan maka semua kata positif akan diberi label bahagia. Dan jika semuanya masuk ke dalam ember bahagia yang sama, maka kesamaan mereka akan diperkuat, dan perbedaannya justru bisa dilupakan. Karena otak kita bisa mengkategorikan segalanya dengan label bahasa agar cepat mengaksesnya. Dari sebuah keputusan yang kalian buat, hanyalah hasil dari ingatan, bukan? Jadi, kemampuan kalian mengakses ingatan langsung dengan pengetahuan kosakata lain. Karena bahasa kita terus berkembang, hambatan bahasa pun membesar. Jadi, bagaimana menurut kalian? Jika kita mulai memanfaatkan kemampuan anak-anak belajar bahasa dan alat-alat gratis yang tersedia, bisakah kita mengurangi hambatan sosial dan mengurangi hambatan bahasa?
The answer to me is crystal clear. By emphasizing foreign language study in your community, you're seizing an opportunity to reverse the creation of gaps in the way that we think and behave. There are so many issues in society today that are thought-based, like racism and hate crimes and bullying. So by increasing the knowledge of language, we can overcome these differences. also by having more multilingual programs for children, of course, because it's that critical age period before age 7 where we have this opportunity. So one such program exists in Jaffa called the Orchard of Abraham's Children. It was founded by a Palestinian man and a Jewish woman who are married. And they've established 3 kindergartens that teach in both Arabic and Hebrew and celebrate both cultures' holidays. So programs like this one are using bilingual education to promote peace and coexistence in a humanitarian, non-political way. And it's so effective because our language is a huge part of our identity. Being born to Reformed Jewish parents gave me really early exposure to the Hebrew language. And if it wasn't for that early exposure, I'm sure I wouldn't be here in Israel studying linguistics or giving this talk to you about the power of being able to identify with more than one language. Now, I want to leave you with this quote by Helen Keller, who was an American author, a political activist, and the first deaf-blind person ever to receive a Bachelor of Arts degree. Suddenly, I felt a misty consciousness as of something forgotten, and a thrill of returning thought. And somehow, the mystery of language was revealed to me. Everything had a name, and each name gave birth to a new thought. Thank you.
Dan saya pribadi sangat jelas. Dengan mendorong pembelajaran bahasa asing di komunitas kalian punya kesempatan untuk memperbaiki cara berpikir dan berperilaku. Banyak masalah dalam masyarakat yang berakar-akar dari pikiran seperti rasisme, kejahatan kebencian, dan perundungan. Dengan memperluas pengetahuan bahasa, kita bisa melewati batas-batas itu. Khususnya dengan menyediakan lebih banyak program multilingual untuk anak-anak, karena sebelum usia 7 tahun, kita memiliki kesempatan emas. Ada salah satu program di Java disebut The Orchard of Abraham's Children. Didirikan oleh seorang pria Palestina dan wanita Yahudi. Mereka mendirikan 3 taman anak-anak yang mengajarkan bahasa Arab dan bahasa Ibrani, serta merayakan hari raya keduanya. Program ini menggunakan pendidikan bilingual yang mempromosikan perdamaian dan hidup berdampingan dalam cara manusiawi dan non-politik, dan sangat efektif, karena bahasa adalah bagian besar dari identitas kita. Saya sendiri lahir dari orang tua Yahudi reformis yang mengenalkan saya pada bahasa Ibrani sejak dini. Kalau bukan karena paparan awal itu, saya mungkin tidak akan berada di saya sekarang, belajar linguistik, atau berdiri di sini memberikan kalian pidato tentang kekuatan identifikasi dengan lebih dari satu bahasa. Sekarang saya ingin menutup dengan kutipan Helen Keller, seorang penulis Amerika, aktivis politik, dan seorang tunanetra tunggu pertama yang meraih gelar sarjana. Tiba-tiba aku merasakan kesadaran samar seperti sesuatu yang terlupakan. Sebuah kilasan pikiran yang kembali, dan entah bagaimana misteri bahasa terungkap bagiku. Segalanya memiliki nama, dan setiap nama melahirkan pikiran baru. Terima kasih.
For almost a decade, scientists chased the source of a deadly new virus through China's tallest mountains and most isolated caverns. They finally found it here, in the bats of Shitao Cave. The virus in question was a coronavirus that caused an epidemic of severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, in 2003. Coronaviruses are a group of viruses covered in little protein spikes that look like a crown, or corona in Latin. There are hundreds of known coronaviruses. 7 of them infect humans and can cause disease. The coronavirus SARS-CoV causes SARS, MERS-CoV causes MERS, and SARS-CoV-2 causes the disease COVID-19. Of the 7 human coronaviruses, 4 cause colds, mild, highly contagious infections of the nose and throat. 2 infect the lungs and cause much more severe illnesses. The 7th, which causes COVID-19, has features of each. It spreads easily, but can severely impact the lungs. When an infected person coughs, droplets containing the virus spray out. The virus can infect a new person when the droplets enter their nose or mouth. Coronaviruses transmit best in enclosed spaces where people are close together. Cold weather keeps their delicate casing from drying out, enabling the virus to survive for longer between hosts, while UV exposure from sunlight may damage it. These seasonal variations matter more for established viruses, but because no one is yet immune to a new virus, it has so many potential hosts that it doesn't need ideal conditions to spread. In the body, the protein spikes embed in the host cells and fuse with them, enabling the virus to hijack the host cell's machinery to replicate its own genes. Coronaviruses store their genes on RNA. All viruses are either RNA viruses or DNA viruses. RNA viruses tend to be smaller, with fewer genes, meaning they infect many hosts and replicate quickly in those hosts. In general, RNA viruses don't have a proofreading mechanism, whereas DNA viruses do. So when an RNA virus replicates, it's much more likely to have mistakes, called mutations. Many of these mutations are useless or even harmful, but some make the virus better suited for certain environments, like a new host species. Epidemics often occur when a virus jumps from animals to humans. This is true of the RNA viruses that cause the Ebola, Zika, and SARS epidemics, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Once in humans, the virus still mutates, usually not enough to create a new virus, but enough to create variations or strains of the original one. Coronaviruses have a few key differences from most RNA viruses. They're some of the largest, meaning they have the most genes. That creates more opportunity for harmful mutations. To counteract this risk, coronaviruses have a unique feature, an enzyme that checks for replication errors and corrects mistakes. This makes coronaviruses much more stable, with a slower mutation rate than other RNA viruses. While this may sound formidable, the slow mutation rate is actually a promising sign when it comes to disarming them. After an infection, our immune systems can recognize germs and destroy them more quickly if they infect us again, so they don't make us sick. But mutations can make a virus less recognizable to our immune systems and therefore more difficult to fight off. They can also make antiviral drugs and vaccines less effective because they're tailored very specifically to a virus. That's why we need a new flu vaccine every year. The influenza virus mutates so quickly that new strains pop up constantly. The slower mutation rate of coronaviruses means our immune systems, drugs, and vaccines might be able to recognize them for longer after infection, and therefore protect us better. Still, we don't know how long our bodies remain immune to different coronaviruses. There's never been an approved treatment or vaccine for a coronavirus. We haven't focused on treating the ones that cause colds, and though scientists began developing treatments for SARS and MERS, the epidemics ended before those treatments completed clinical trials. As we continue to encroach on other animals' habitats, some scientists say a new coronavirus jumping to humans is inevitable. But if we investigate these unknowns, it doesn't have to be devastating. Students and teachers all over the world did their part to help slow the spread of COVID-19 by staying home. But what about their graduation ceremonies? Learn more about TED's global campaign to celebrate and elevate the hopes and ideas of an entire generation. Get involved at ted.com/graduation.
Selama hampir 10 tahun, para ilmuwan menelusuri asal-usul virus mematikan yang menyebabkan wabah SARS di tahun 2003. Akhirnya, mereka menemukan sumbernya di Gua Kelelawar di Cina. Virus ini adalah bagian dari kelompok virus corona, disebut demikian karena bentuknya yang seperti mahkota. Ada ratusan jenis virus corona, tapi hanya 7 yang bisa menginfeksi manusia. 4 diantaranya hanya menyebabkan flu biasa, tapi 3 lainnya menyebabkan penyakit yang jauh lebih serius, termasuk SARS, MERS, dan yang terbaru, COVID-19. COVID-19 ini unik karena menular dengan mudah seperti flu, tapi bisa berdampak berat pada paru-paru. Penularan utamanya lewat percikan air saat seseorang batuk atau bersin. Dan virus ini lebih mudah menyebar di ruangan tertutup. Cuaca dingin juga membantu virus bertahan lebih lama, sedangkan sinar matahari bisa merusaknya. Virus corona menggunakan protein di permukaannya untuk menempel dan masuk ke dalam sel tubuh manusia, lalu mengambil alih mesin sel utuh untuk memperbanyak diri. Virus ini menyimpan materi genetiknya dalam bentuk RNA. Dan RNA virus ini seperti cenderung bermutasi lebih sering karena tidak punya sistem perbaikan seperti virus DNA. Sebagian besar mutasi tidak berguna, tapi ada yang justru membuat virus lebih cocok untuk menginfeksi spesies baru, termasuk manusia. Itulah sebabnya banyak wabah besar, seperti Ebola, Zika, SARS, dan COVID-19, berasal dari virus yang berpindah dari hewan ke manusia. Menariknya, meskipun virus corona termasuk RNA virus, mereka punya enzim khusus yang memperbaiki kesalahan saat menggandakan diri. Ini membuat mutasinya lebih lambat dibanding RNA virus lain. Dan itu memberi harapan, artinya sistem imun kita atau vaksin bisa bertahan lebih lama dalam waktu melawan virus ini. Namun, masih banyak yang belum kita tahu. Belum ada vaksin atau obat yang benar-benar tuntas untuk virus corona, karena penelitian sebelumnya terhenti saat wabah mereda. Tapi, jika kita mau belajar lebih dalam, kita bisa mencegah wabah berikutnya menjadi bencana besar. Terima kasih.